Okay, welcome to episode 3 of our interview series. Today we're joined by Ashley Ward from White Roding FC. We've also got myself, Andy Kroll from Essex FA, and Lawrence Gower. So welcome, Ashley. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
We've heard lots about you. All good.
Oh.
So Ashley was our hashtag Celebrate Essex Adult Coach Award winner earlier this year. So sort of February 2020, for his efforts in the adult game and specifically veterans football. We won't go into too much detail because I think you're gonna share lots of interesting things about the journey so far, and we're very much looking forward to having some conversation and asking you a few questions about that. So I suppose we can start by just pointing out your current background, your backdrop there, Ashley.
Yeah, I'm in the mid-refurbished White Roding home changing room. It looks a bit like Soccer AM at present. It wasn't my idea. It was one of the team. So they thought it'd be a good idea just to show what they've been doing during the lockdown. We've got a little bit more work to go, but yeah.
Who's number 11?
Number 11, that actually belongs to a guy called Mark Corner. It was his idea originally, with the caveat of, I must have my shirt hanging up, please, gaffer. So I've taken him at his word, and that's his shirt up there. I don't know whose number that is. I haven't checked. So
He's even got a mention.
Yeah.
There's a name drop, and that's staying in the recording as well. And there's a few other props by the looks of things, which I'm sure might get mentioned throughout as well. So perhaps we'll come on to those a bit later on. So Ashley, it's over to you, really. I know you've very kindly pulled together some content for us to share. We'll just run through that, I suppose. So it's over to you. But thanks for joining us, and we look forward to hearing about how things have gone so far.
Thank you. I mean, I titled it Finding Yourself Within a Winning Formula, and it doesn't need to necessarily talk about winning on the football field. So yes, a bit of background blurb to me. I managed White Roding 45s, commonly known as the Super Vets. Nothing to do with their physical prowess, just the fact they're slightly older than the 35s. I'm a single dad of 2 boys, Charlie and Reese, who will hate that photo because they look as though they're getting on. And when I'm not running a football team, and pre-lockdown, I've spent 25 years in learning and development. And that ranges from managing teams, training people all over the globe on a variety of different subjects. And because of my boys, I've had an interest in health and wellness for about 12 years, and I will talk about that towards the end, but there's a common theme, as you'll soon see. Personally, I'm a Liverpool fan, so you're going to hate me for that, or many people will. But yeah, that's me, that's my background. So, my journey to White Roding, and you've got an image up there. My favourite image, I don't have too many of me playing. I'm right at the back next to the guy who's the substitute. I had hair in those days. I played youth football, as many kids do, represented the county and district level. And I came through the youth ranks at St Margaret's, and that's where that photo is taken. And I came through the youth ranks, played on the Sunday team, played in the senior team. And the guy in the end, John Elliott, is a lovely guy. Take much inspiration from him. Very demanding, very challenging, but actually very rewarding. So just a little reference to him. Played there for about 10 years. Went to go and join Much Haddon. Dropped down, but with actually some very good players. Game on county cups and the like. Returned back to St Margaret's in my late 20s. And then about 10 years ago, I snapped my cruciates. So if anyone's had a bad injury, I feel your pain, literally and metaphorically. Been repaired, and I've been playing casually ever since. And then about 3 years ago, I was asked to make up numbers for a team called White Roding. I didn't even know where the village was. I didn't know anything about the football. I'd certainly not played vets football. So I started out in the reserves, played for the first team, and last year, season before last, combination of 35s and 45s. And that's what brought me to white roading. It was helping out friends. So many people don't know white roading. It's caught between Harlow, Dunmow and Chelmsford, along the Chelmsford Road. It was founded in 1946. It celebrates its 75th anniversary. It has a couple of vets teams, 35s and a 45, and a Sunday football team now. Mixed success over the years, but a few surprises. So 3 images. The top image is the first ever photo of the first ever white roading team. The middle is actually the Welsh national football team that have used this club as a base in the 90s. And it's very relevant, that photo, because you'll see people like Giggs, Crossley, Coleman, Hearts and Speed that I will reference because we take inspiration, my team take inspiration from that photo because of what those guys have gone through. And like many village football teams in and around this neck of the woods, we've also played against the Rod Stewart Select 11, or the Vagabonds as you call them. So I never intended to be manager. In 2019, my knee needed further surgery. I knew it was going to limit my playing time. So I was going to play the odd game here or there. And during pre-season, during the friendly, there were some significant challenges between the current or the previous manager and the team. And it was, dare I say, toys out of the pram at half time, and it almost ended up with no football team being run, which was going to be really difficult for the football club because they needed 3 teams in order to get the subs to pay bills and so on and so forth. So with about a week's notice, I was asked, would I take charge? And I was happy to do so, but it came with its challenges. So if I think about the pre-season challenges and 1 week's notice, that's bad enough. But then we had some other issues that I'll get into in a moment. So what happened next? I went on holiday. And that picture was taken on the Orient Express. And if you've ever done the Orient Express, it goes through lots of mountains and tunnels and bends, and you don't know where you're going from one moment to the next. So one of the challenges that I had when I got back was with the previous regime. They felt that they should still be involved, wanted to retain control, wanted to regain some kind of authority. The players and the club hierarchy didn't want that to happen. Unfortunately, that individual stirred up some issues, and I will relate and refer back to them in a moment because it talks about mental health, and it's very relevant today and the last couple of years, but it refers back to mental health. I had limited resources. I only had access to a kit. I had a few balls. I had a small squad. I only had limited phone numbers. I was told in Walter Winterbottom style, this is the 11 that you can have for a Saturday. Do what you will with them. And that really wasn't for me. It was low expectations from everybody concerned. And previous year, the team had played 19 games. They'd only won 2. They'd lost 16 and the goal difference was -52. So you can see straight away that I was taking over at quite a low point. So something had to change and we had to do things differently. And if you'd like to go on to the next slide, this was what my ideas was about. Now that woman, not many people will recognise. Her name's Eleanor Roosevelt. She was the wife of Franklin Roosevelt, and she's got a very long background in doing lots of different and wonderful things. She has a quote, and it is, great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. I couldn't change the people in my team. I only had a small squad. I didn't have a black book of names to call. The events, well, they're the fixtures. I can't change that, but I could change everything else in terms of the ideas. So we took inspiration from a variety of different sources. And if anyone ever gets the opportunity to read any of the books by Matthew Syed, where he looks at what makes success, and he looks at how you take something from one sport and convert it into another. And it isn't just about sport. He will explain to you how you can benefit, and Dave Brailsford is all about marching games. So if I think about this, it's about food, it's about fitness, it's about flexibility, it was about fun, it was about finances, and it was about friendship. And they were the F's that I needed to work on, and work on them quickly and all at the same time, if that's at all possible. So the first of those F's was food. In the Essex Vets League, you are obliged to provide hospitality, and that is typically for about 40 people. And the season before I came in, it was hot dogs of questionable meat, cheese that had no cheese ingredients on packaging, and rolls that had seen better days. So the idea was that the post-match hospitality needed to improve. I also like cooking, so this was a bit of a win-win for me. So what we decided to do was everything fresh made. So actually I turn up in the morning and I cook. It's heavily plant-based and largely organic as well. Plant-based, there's lots of research which says the more meat you eat, actually that creates issues within the body, stress issues. So actually you need to eat vegetables. We ask our kids to eat vegetables. So why can't we as adults? And make it beneficial, not just budget constrained. So we up the budget from £20 for 40 people to a heavy £30. So that image that you have there was vegan chili with squash, sweet potatoes, 4 types of beans, tomatoes, peppers, with black rice, nachos, salsa, creme fraiche, all for 30 quid for 40 people. It's possible, and that was all organic. And if you think about what we put into our bodies, how we fuel and refuel, it's incredibly important, particularly at the age of 45, of how we can do that and how we can do that well, rather than a pint of beer in our hand and a hot dog in the other.
Just on that, actually. So it's fascinating listening in, and we don't want to kind of hijack where things are at, but with the challenges that you face, obviously there would have been multiple along the way, and we've sort of briefly mentioned that in a previous conversation. But was this one of the areas that had quite a lot of opposition in terms of diet and food?
It was strange. Everyone moaned about the old food. So when I did this, I was asked, well, what's that green stuff? And where's my meat? And we've got water here with mint and lemons and limes for the lads. And some of them will go, ooh. We also had one individual that didn't like onions. So initially it was a bit of a shock to the system. Can you imagine giving your children not chicken nuggets and chips, but actually a plate of salad? And men of a certain age aren't dissimilar to children in their eating habits. I would actually say that that whole meal was cleared, eaten straight away, because once someone took the first bite, they went, oh, this is quite nice. And then it quickly transpired into, well, what's next week? So we've had butterbean stew in the winter, of course. We've had Mexican, we've had Italian, we had vegetable lasagna, no meat in that whatsoever. And so I think the initial reaction is, where's my meat? What's the green stuff? This isn't chips and sausage. Mm. But actually, for the similar price, you could get that. And so we're lucky, we've got our own kitchen here. Well, that's all served on crockery rather than paper plates. So we're not buying paper plates, we're using that money to pay for the food.
Brilliant. Really good. I mean, there's so much we can discuss in there, but I think just jumps out at me really the food side of things is just because it is such a shift in mentality, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, particularly around the adult and veterans game, it would be a bit of a shift perhaps from the norm. And there are other clubs out there that are doing some really good things around, you know, diet and nutrition, but just to kind of initially start changing mindsets? That must have been a real challenge initially.
Well, it was, and I can be a bit thick-skinned sometimes. So I said, well, that's your dinner. Take it or leave it. You're a dad. You'll know that line. You're going to go hungry otherwise. And slowly but surely, it's okay. I'll have a nibble. I'm still not happy I haven't got meat. And you know, there's a certain young lady that is vegetarian in my life, and if you'd asked me 10 years ago, would I have been largely vegetarian, I would have said no. I am today.
Yeah.
And if I think about my children, and particularly Charlie, and I will talk about him later, it's really important that he eats healthily. So if it's good for our kids, why isn't it good for us adults?
I think, yeah. No, it's just setting the standard. I think it's it's not always easy for everybody to do, and it's far beyond my personal area of expertise. But it's just practice what you preach kind of thing, isn't it? We speak a lot with coaches, particularly youth coaches, just because of the sheer size of the game across the county, and they'll try to advocate healthy eating, but I think leading by example is one of the best things you can do. Naturally, children particularly, will mirror your actions, and that goes for obviously a lot of things, which I'm sure we'll come on to, but food is such a big element of that. Absolutely.
Yeah, if I think back to when I was younger and playing senior football, it was hard drinking, it was hard football, hard running, and it was hard luck if you got an injury. And you refueled with a pint in your hand. I hate to say it. And you wake up the next morning and you go and play Sunday football. And is it any wonder that you came home on a Sunday afternoon absolutely shattered and needed to lay down in a dark room because you just hadn't put the right things inside of your body? So
absolutely. Brilliant. I'll let you carry on.
That's right. So we addressed the football, and then we looked at the fitness. Now, the club didn't really train. They had a couple of pre-season jogabouts, and that was about it. So for me, fitness is much more than just about match day. So we organised training, shock horror, men of 45 having to train, and they would train in sunshine, as you've got a picture of one of our guys there. They would train in the pouring of rain. When we didn't have games because of the poor weather, they would train up here in the torrential rain, coated in mud. And we organised games and exercises. And if I think about going back to a socially distant training for the professional teams, I'm always thinking about what do we do and how do we make sure everyone is 2 metres apart but actually getting proper exercise and ball time. The players challenged each other. So if you ever look at my Twitter feed, you will see that my guys are quite often posting times of their 5-kilometre runs. And they're doing it in about 25 minutes, which isn't bad for some of them approaching 60. And so they started to challenge each other. And the rule was, the fitter you are, the healthier you are, the more chance you're likely to play more games. So you need to start explaining to them that training isn't a punishment, it's actually your route to actually getting better football. And they were working a lot harder. I did midweek check-ins. I went to observe some of them that were playing five-a-side, and I'd give them their feedback. Some of them actually wanted sessions either on the phone, on WhatsApp, or even face-to-face about what I was observing, and they were looking for feedback. So by actually starting to invest in them as adults, they were beginning to respond and saying, now that you've seen this, what do you think of that, and how can you help me get fitter, and what's on the menu next week, because I want to try and replicate that throughout the course of the week. So they were beginning to learn. I also introduced a new kit, a red and white kit, which some individuals would claim is slimmer fitting. It's not. It's Hummel, it's authentic range, and some of them went, I might need an XXXL shirt, Gaffer, and the answer was no, because if you need a XXXL shirt, we need to start talking about your health. And it isn't about fat shaming, but it's about having that mature conversation which says, you've got to start looking after yourself, because the bigger you are, the more stress that puts on your body. It's not going to end well at some point.
Absolutely.
So, but because they were working harder, they were a lot stiffer. They were playing better football. So flexibility. So you have an image there of the first ever yoga session the lads went to. We needed to look at those marginal gains, and as such, I worked with the yoga studio called St. Swing Place, which is just outside of Dunmow, to develop a program of Iyengar yoga. Iyengar is really important because it's actually quite structured, and it uses props, and it puts on there the mats and the blocks and the belts, and we use chairs, and it helps the guys begin to stretch. And as you can see from that photo, most of them couldn't even bend over on the first session. They were that tight and stiff. And it was focused on football, and we looked at hamstrings and abs and everything that we needed to think about. We also did meditation. Not something you'd associate with a football team, not certainly an adult football team of 45-year-olds, but within each yoga session, there's something called Shavasana, 15 minutes of focus, calm, dark, silent. And it's about trying to get the guys to think about what's going on inside of their head, both in sporting but also at a personal level, and how that can actually help them. So they went from not being able to touch their toes to doing positions such as Trikonasa, which is something quite complex. But I was introduced to yoga by quite a young lady in my life, and she thought it would be good for my knee. And it has been good for my knee, and it's been great for these guys. The interesting part to this, I suppose, is twofold. One, the wives didn't believe us, so they wanted to come and watch and observe. The second is go back to that Welsh football picture. Ryan Giggs, he will credit yoga to his longevity in the game at the top level.
Absolutely.
And so these guys are now much more flexible than they've ever been. I'd love to show you an after picture. I'll have to get one for you. So that was the flexibility. I think if I knew at 17 what yoga was, I would have done it from the get-go. So kids, much more flexible, much more live, and I think that ought to be introduced as some part of a coaching program.
Actually, I'm just curious. I don't know, Lawrence, you might have one or two questions as well as we're going through, but with regards to the yoga, how did you go about broaching that? Because I'm sure there'll be people that kind of listening in, watching, and perhaps work with an adults team or vets team, super vets team even.
Yeah.
And you just how was that broached? You know, what obviously, you know, you're going to go. We've spoken already about relationships and that kind of rapport you've got with the individuals, but you know, how did you first go about that? Was it, you know, let's go and try this out, or?
I think it was. I think it was a combination of factors. So we started it part way through the season, and you could see that people were struggling to recover after training and after matches. And we spoke about stretching and what can we do. And the lad went, well, what we need someone to really stretch us. And I went, well, that's good. That's the starting point. You'll recognise that. Let me tell you what I do. So it's almost about making yourself vulnerable. I will talk about that later on. But making yourself vulnerable and saying, actually, this is what I do. I do yoga. And the initial reaction was, too tight. I'm not doing that. Which is typical of middle-aged men. And the second was, my wife's been telling me to do that for years. She thinks it helped my back out.
Yeah.
So by actually engaging with the families, and particularly the wives and the girlfriends, that helps. The ones that didn't want to do it or were reticent, actually, I said, we're going to have a closed class. So it's just going to be us. So treat it like a training session, and the competitive nature is I'm going to try and outdo you by this particular position. I say it's just going to be us.
Brilliant.
And it's just going to be on football. So there's no embarrassment, no one can see you, and to be fair, I subsidised it to get them interested. In the end, they were paying to attend.
I suppose that the difficulty is people having the realisation that it can relate to football and that it is relevant. I mean, for example, with my so I coach youth teams. So with a lot of the young players, I encourage gymnastics because I think that's massively valuable. And obviously for younger children, maybe yoga is going to be a little bit too slow for them. So they're going to want something where they're moving around a lot. So gymnastics is the kind of ideal solution there. But again, it's the challenge of broaching that with parents who may feel that it's not relevant to football, and they may think there's no ball involved, there's no running around, there's no scoring. So it's difficult, I suppose, for people to find a relevance to football.
Well, someone like Birmingham City have used Iyengar yoga for quite some time. As a Liverpool fan, during lockdown, they've had daily yoga sessions. So I think that the mindset is changing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be about just kicking a football. It really doesn't. And that's why I referenced Matthew Syed. And if you read any of his books, where he says you can learn so much from other sports, and you can take that and it can give you a distinct benefit. Now, if you could be much more flexible, does that mean you can recover quicker? Does that mean you have fewer muscle injuries? That's how I sold it to my guys.
Yeah.
You're going to be less time on the sideline and more time on the pitch. So do this for me and you'll get more game time. So I think that there's a mindset change happening. It doesn't happen everywhere because there are some old school thoughts of football must be a ball at my feet and kicking 9 bells out of each other. No.
Absolutely. I think that kind of more holistic approach to work, fitness, well-being is something that you can see why that would be beneficial for anybody, really. I mean, something we advocate regularly through our kind of programs and courses, workshops is that multi-sport kind of approach. It's easy to say, it's often difficult. We're dealing with mainly volunteers. That's the nature of what we do. But I think just opening your mind really, and just expanding the thought process around, well, what can that relate to? Is it another team sport perhaps, or is it something like yoga or gymnastics? And just seeing, there's some really interesting stuff from various different coaches, academics, all kind of research around, just other ways that you can incorporate different things into your training. It might just be that you mention, give this a go at home. Particularly in this current time, can you do this pose or this stretch? And that might sound silly, particularly maybe for adults, but there's proof here that if you get the right relationships with people, you can encourage that, and it certainly has more kind of long-term benefits as well. Yeah,
and I think that as a coach, you don't need all of the answers, but you do need to explore all of the options.
Yeah.
So somewhere like St. Greene Place was great because they had a number of different yoga teachers there, and I could sit down and explain what I was trying to achieve and some of the challenges, and they came up with a program, a set of answers, and it was yes, of course I went with them, but it was almost handing that part of the coaching over to the yoga teacher. And as parents, we know what it's like. Sometimes your children will be an absolute nightmare for you, but they'll be lovely for someone else. So I think if I'd have run that yoga class, I might have been greeted with a different response. But the lads took to it, and as I say, at the end of it, they were paying for it. So what does that tell you?
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant stuff. I'll let you carry on. Fantastic.
Thank you. So it was, there's some important stuff there and heavy stuff, but it doesn't need to be too serious. It needed to be fun, and for me, I think it's more about than just playing. And I think for any coach, you need to think about the social events, and it doesn't need to be organised by you. The social events we do here are not organised by me, they're organised by the players. And they're organising social events because they're beginning to like each other. They don't just turn up on the Saturday, play football, have a drink and disappear. They're now going, I've got something in common with you.
Yeah.
And when you think about factors at the youth level, an adult level or a veterans level, there's a lot that goes on behind football. And I'll get on to that in a couple of moments' time. We involve families, partners, kids, and I think that's really, really important. You don't want to disappear. You don't want to be a football widow or widower. You don't want to be a slave to your children. You need to involve the families. It needs to be very social, and that's what we do here. And these events, plus the food and getting to know each other, actually drives families in. So rather than just turn up, play your football, disappear, what can we do to widen the circle? And that also goes to the community as well. Really important. We have fun. So I'll move out of the way, but we have the what we call the Wally of the Week trophy. It started out as a small cup and gets added to, and it's almost a way of self-discipline between players, and they treat it as fun. So it's, I mean, this is on a golf cart, and I won't go into detail of what's there, but yeah, they're allowed to relax and they're allowed to be themselves. And for me, it was a bit of a challenge because some of the players, most of the players are older than I am. Some of them are my friends. So I also need to be the butt of their joke. I also need to butt out of the changing room. And we're all children at heart, so it has to be fun. And that includes on the pitch and off the pitch. And if you're having fun off the pitch, when you need to be on the pitch and you need to be switched on, you can ask that of them and they'll respond. So don't treat everything so seriously that it loses its enjoyment.
It's such a powerful message, that Ashley, that element around fun. Just from conversations, obviously we're very fortunate we get to speak to a whole wide, huge range of people from all different backgrounds, different parts of the county, you know, those that are sort of inner city, those are out, you know, out in the leafy suburbs and north of the county. And it's just fascinating sometimes when you listen in, and a lot of people will say fun is a key element. If I take a level 1 course, for example, we ask coaches about the key things that they feel a coach should be, or an environment that should be set, and fun comes up regularly, of course, but it comes up more often with the younger children. And it almost, although other people mention it, it almost feels like, well, fun gradually dissipates as things become more serious. Now, you know, it doesn't matter if it's top end professional footballers who have all these kind of resources and things at their fingertips, and they can go and jump on the golf course at any time or whatever it may be and have fun. There's no reason, and you know, proof in the pudding with what you're doing is there's no reason why it can't be fun at absolutely every level. And it might mean just a little bit of planning. It might mean, in my eyes, asking them what they'd like, because involving them, one thing I've written down here is throughout this is it's shared experiences, and you've involved everybody in the process. So it's not I'm coming in, I'm doing this, and it's all about me as the coach. It's I'm involving you, and it doesn't matter if they're adults, because children at all ages are perfectly capable of sharing how they feel about things. And they're, you know, in school every day, they're encouraged to do that, and they work in groups and they share things with their peers, and that they have that skill set. It exists, and they're allowed those opportunities to have fun and to express things. And it's just perhaps a mindset and a bit of education. It's something that we try and promote as much as we can, is involve them more, and you'll probably get more out of it as a coach. You know, step back, say less.
Massively, and I think the challenge, certainly for my predecessor and a lot of coaches, is that they feel as though they have to have all of the answers, they have to have all of the control, and no, they don't. No. Whether it's tactics on the pitch, which I might listen to, I might ignore, or allowing them to suggest or be involved. And at times I'll delegate and go, right, okay, this needs to be done. Who's going to do it? And do it in the way that you want to do it. And actually have the confidence and the trust in that individual to do something. And I think too often coaches feel obliged they've got to do everything. I do a huge amount, lots of coaches do, but at the same time you need to share the responsibility, the involvement, the input.
It's actually quite stressful, as if you do take if you take everything on yourself as a coach, it's incredibly stressful. And again, it's a conversation we've had quite a lot of times, but if you take on all of those things and feel like you are the font of all knowledge, or that you have to control everything, all you're doing is putting more and more pressure on yourself.
Yeah. So I mentioned right at the start, where am I? I'm in the part refurbished changing room during lockdown. It was my idea to change it. It needed changing. I don't think it had been decorated in 10 years, but it's been done by different members of the team. So we've got painters, we've got electricians, we've got CCTV guys, we've got plumbers, and that's just an example of something very physical and tangible. But actually, as soon as you say, look, I need help, and being vulnerable or making that offer to say, look guys, we need to pull together, more often than not, people will put their hand up and say, I've got an idea, or I've got this skill, or what about doing that? So whether that's on the training ground, the football field, or after, don't put it all on your own shoulders, because it will become too much, and you'll either be swamped by it, or you'll become very hardened by it as a coach, and that doesn't help progress either you as an individual, or the players, or the club.
Absolutely. It's unfortunately a kind of one of those negative things that we hear regularly in the roles that we do within the county, whether be football development officers or a governance team, and so the various staff that we have, and we have regular dialogue with often the same people from the club. And obviously we deal with hundreds and hundreds of different teams and clubs, but often you hear from the same sorts of people because they've taken on absolutely everything. Now that might just be an example of an individual coach taking on too much. Often, regularly, daily hear story, someone who's got a son and a daughter, or two sons, or whatever it is, and they've ended up taking on two teams. And then, because you can do that, well, maybe you can take on the little development squad. Or you've also got examples the other end of club officials who go, well, I'll do this. And before you know it, I'm doing this. And you see it, on our systems of people with multiple roles. And unfortunately, they often become the people that leave the game. But they're the people we need, and and that delegation bit, it's not easy at all, because some people it's just not within their skill set. But I suppose that a top tip, if you like, would be is as early as possible start to share those roles and responsibilities out.
Indeed, it's like asking your kids to tidy their bedroom, or to to clean their plates, or whatever it may be. It's those sort of things. So the food is a great example. That the food, I started off, and I do most of the food, but actually some of the lads said, do you mind if I do chicken chasseur this week? No, of course not. We run a football card, and someone will always be delegated to go and do that to raise a little bit of extra money. Players have to wash their plates, and it could be a whole host of different things. I think some of the things the FA do are useful, and I'd probably look at developing those further. So things like the PayPal app, which is a good start. I think probably needs to be further refined. But some of those automated tools can certainly help take the burden from one man or one woman doing everything.
It also adds to that club feel, doesn't it? I mean, as you say, like they've got involved with the food, I imagine a lot of the players are there earlier and a lot of the players are there later than maybe they would have been previously.
Yeah.
So it just adds to that kind of community feel, doesn't it? That the players are there, you know, they're not just there to play a game of football. They're there for the you know, the kind of entire experience.
So massively, and I think that for my lads, and I'll get on to the friendship piece shortly, they've really struggled with the lockdown because it isn't just about football. Yes, they've missed kicking the football, they've missed the social side, they've missed the regularity of turning up and turning up early. I mean, we had a semi-final earlier this year, and kickoff was at 1:30, or should have been. They were here mid-morning with a team briefing and breakfast, and they eventually got home at whatever hour. Perhaps not great every week, but they missed that regularity.
Yeah.
So it's massively impacted them, and whatever you can do on WhatsApp and FaceTime helps, but it's not the same.
No, absolutely.
Just on that, Ash, out of interest, obviously it's you know what you're doing is very inclusive of all of the players. You know, it sounds like there's a really good kind of feel to the club, and everyone. It sounds like everyone, you know, gets involved and is kind of immersed in it. Did you find any kind of pushback or any players that maybe felt they just wanted to turn up and play football? They didn't want the extra.
Yeah, I can think of one player in particular who his words were, "I just want to play football," and I didn't know really anything about him. I played half a dozen games with him, and we sat down over a coffee, and I understood his journey of why he came and what he saw the vision was as far as he was concerned, and he listened to me about what I thought it should be, and we came to a compromise, and I'll talk about expectations and exceptions in a moment. And you know, I said, look, you know, this is what I'm asking of everybody because we needed to move on. We couldn't have won 2 games all season and been happy about it. That's not great. So things need to change. You need to give your element to this. And we tried it for a couple of weeks, and to be fair, he came up with suggestions that I took on board and I enacted upon. But he ultimately felt as though it was perhaps not for him. He just wanted to kick a football. And that's fine, that's great. He's gone with my blessing and best wishes, of course. But football, unless you as a player are going to invest in it, it's very difficult to demand something back. And we want our children and our adults to be more active and to be more engaged. But at some point, that individual has to contribute something. And whether that is personality, whether that is, and it shouldn't just be about prowess on the football field, by the way, but they need to contribute something.
Very good point. Well, conscious of the time, and there's loads we go into, but I'll hand that back over to you because I think there's definitely some interesting pieces to still discuss. So finances was your next.
Yeah, finances. I mean, really, just to touch on this, that seek solutions from different sources. What we've done doesn't need to cost pounds and pounds and pounds. As I've mentioned about the clubhouse and changing rooms, get players to offer more. For those that can pay more, perhaps they pay more, but it isn't always about money. They can offer their resources. I've listed some of our sponsors down there. It's about getting quid pro quos. So the yoga, we got a subsidy, but we had to appear in their promotional materials. So you look at things like that. We're in there and we're on Facebook, and it gets seen by a wider audience. And strangely enough, some of our players are ringing me up and saying, "I can't believe I'm on Facebook doing a yoga pose. My secretary's just spoken to me." Yeah, it's a small price to pay. Consider grants from the FA Football Foundation. There's lots of money out there you need to go out and you need to look. It's not going to come knocking on your door, no matter how good that marketing may be. But go and consider grants and actually use them for long-term benefit. So whether it is yoga, whether it is the pitch, but don't use them for consumables. You need to invest emotionally, time, but also financially, but actually do it for the long term, not for the easy win. But the last piece of my S is friendship. I've got a picture of Jason McAteer there, and I'll explain why in a moment. Behind every player, there is a person. How well do you know your players? And at the time when I took over, I knew 3 or 4 of them, but I didn't know most of them. I didn't know their name. Well, I knew some of their names. I didn't know where they lived, what their family circumstances were, nothing. And so it was important for me to get to know and understand every individual. And in doing so, I had to be open and vulnerable. I referenced earlier about the previous incumbent. The season that I was playing, I couldn't make a game when he was playing me up, and I happened to confide in that individual that it impacts upon my emotional well-being, my health, mental health. And as part of his frustration about being usurped, as he saw it, he decided to make that public and almost kind of name and shame. Why would you want someone who suffers from depression to run a football team? It's pretty much the claim that he took. So it meant that for those that didn't know me, I had to explain, and I also opened up even further to those that did know. And it was a bit of a Spartacus moment. Me too. I suffer from that. And if you look at the stats, it's 1 in 4. And that previous season that I took over, there were 2 individuals in the team that it wasn't shared amongst anybody. That one of them had lost their son and another had lost their father. I've lost 2 friends through suicide. And by actually saying, look, I'm not feeling great, or I do suffer from this, or this is going on at home, it impacts on what goes on in the changing room. And some people use football for a crutch to get away from their troubles, and I most certainly do, and have done in the past. So it was important for me to understand who the players were, and because I showed vulnerability and opened up about my challenges, they were happy and felt comfortable and confident about opening up about theirs. And then it appeared that it just wasn't a father and a son, but also a brother had also been lost previously. So we've got much more in common, but unfortunately, as middle-aged men, we bottle it up. And I know Prince William's doing a programme coming up soon, or it might have already been on, and he makes reference to something similar, and it's entirely correct. And going back to that Wales picture, Gary Speed, John Hartson, Mark Crossley, on his Big Norm Twitter feed, talks about talking and sharing, and that is really, really important. So what goes on in the changing room and on the football field is just one small part of their daily activity or their weekly pressures. And as such, because they started to open up, they started to trust each other more on the football field as well as off it. And now they've got their own support network.
Brilliant.
It takes someone to stand up and say, a coach to ask questions and actually to really care. I think there's an advert out on TV at the moment, and it's a woman who starts off by saying, "How are you?" No, really, how are you? I can't tell you the name of the advert. But yes, how well do we know the children that play in our teams, or the teammates that share the showers, or whatever it may be? Yeah, absolutely. We probably don't. Yeah. I'm really, really lucky in the job that I have. I've met with the likes of Steve Peters, Dave Allred, both great sporting psychologists. I've listened to Johnny Wilkinson. I've sat down with Clark Carlisle. Brilliant. and to listen to some of their stories and how we should never ever allow ourselves to get into that position as people or population.
I think it's something that's it's obviously it's not it's sometimes perceived that it's a new thing. Thankfully, people are now speaking more about it than they ever have. But and it does take, you have to make quite a bold move sometimes to take that first step, like you have there, Ashley, and just said, look, I'm going to be vulnerable, you know, just share and open up. Something as simple as, I'm just thinking of maybe a youth coach who says, oh, I didn't quite get that right today, or I didn't think that, you know, I didn't think that was a very good training session because I didn't really plan it enough, because I've not had too much time. Now, without going into loads and loads of detail, obviously depending on who you're working with, that just shows a little bit of vulnerability, which will naturally open up better, deeper conversations. And, you know, if you're working in youth football, you know that there's a support network there. You've got club welfare officers who can support that, and then they've got additional, you know, mechanisms in place to do that. But within the adult game, it is often seen as a bit of a taboo. And I think, you know, there'll always be at least one person within a squad that would probably be happy to speak, but perhaps just needs that little push just to start things. And it might not be in a whole club setting, might not be the right place, but it might be when you're having a bit of a social time, you know, with squad players, and just starting the conversation, I think is the real step, isn't it? The first step.
Hugely. I mean, I cannot agree with that anymore. You know, coaches don't have to have all the answers. They don't have to be bombastic. Whether it's a child or an adult, you know, sit down and understand. And from a child perspective, talk to the parents. Yeah, I know what it was like when I was a youth player and I got dropped from the representative team. I was in absolute floods and I was about 13. But actually, no one ever spoke to my parents about it. I just had to deal with it by myself. So yeah, it's I think it's really important. And Jason McAteer, that Through the Storm video is found now long, well worth watching, because he talks about what it's like to be a player and suffer from those challenges and those dark moments, and actually what it's like to go away from the changing room and feel frustrated about the football that you've played, or to come from a higher football to the low of being at home. So well worth it. I highly recommend it.
Mm. Man, as you kind of mentioned there, I mean, football's kind of previously proved quite unwelcoming to those types of discussion. And, you know, I suppose football by its nature has always kind of been quite selfish in a way, and ruthless in terms of, you know, a kind of wanting to win and a competitiveness. So it's never really been too open to that. But I think it's just people are starting to realise that, you know, that there's millions of people involved in football, from grassroots to you know, an elite level, and the more kind of confident and comfortable that people can be talking about mental health, you know, I suppose the aim eventually is that they can speak, you know, openly as if they would about an injury, an ankle injury or a shoulder injury or whatever, should be seen, you know, the same as mental health.
Hugely. My high point of the season, and I'll talk about it in a second, but my high point of the season was actually listening to the lads. They weren't aware that I was listening, but listening to the lads talking about their problems at home.
Yeah.
And what's going on. And I just sat back and thought, wow, I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't expect it after, you know, previous seasons. And
if you think back, you know, years ago, if we're talking, you know, even 15, 20 years ago, it just wouldn't happen.
No.
But it shows how, you know, football can just be that vehicle. And as you say, you don't have to have all the answers, but, you know, football just in itself can improve quality of people's lives. And, you know, obviously the benefits that it sounds like that you guys are delivering there, you know, social inclusion, you know, helping physical health, and ultimately improving or which will ultimately improve mental health as well.
Yes.
Brilliant stuff. Good, definitely. I feel perhaps a follow-up conversation coming on here, Ashley, if you'd be happy in the future, because I think there's probably more we could delve into with some of this. But
I think we say that every time, don't we? Because
there's so much that we could speak about.
We don't have enough time.
We'll see if we can do a follow-up.
More than happy. I know time's pressing, but I mean, if I look at not quite the final result, and there's a reason for not quite final. We played 13 games this year, awful weather. We won 7, drew 4, lost 2, goal difference of +14. With a smaller squad of pretty much the same players from the year before. We got into our first ever cup final as a club. We were due to play on the 18th of March, apologies. And that was on the Wednesday, and the lockdown pretty much happened on the Monday as we were training. We had games in hand that meant we could have won the league. More importantly, there were slimmer waistlines. There were guys that had sober months. And as I mentioned before, there were support networks created. So that is a huge plus point. That tops winning the cup, as far as I'm concerned. The lads might disagree. So it takes me on to lessons learned, and there's a picture of someone that isn't English, isn't British, isn't involved in football. I'll speak about him in a moment. Guidelines are great for all ages, not just youth. That would be my first point. One, youth football, you've got safeguarding measures. Adult football, certainly vets football, certainly this club, didn't have contact details for emergencies, health conditions. I've got players at 60 that have had heart attacks that take a spray before each game. As a manager, I didn't know. And that's got to change. So one of the things I'd ask of the FA is whether it's mandatory that you do that level 1 coaching, or whether there is some kind of expansion on the care and the guidance and the welfare that the managers of how to run a football team from a personal perspective. Expect, explain and accept. Make expectations. People need a focus, they need a goal, and tell them what your rationale is and allow them to input. Again, you haven't got all of the answers. Make exceptions. Not everybody is the same, and that's really important. And for some people, it could be time, it could be money, it could be ability, but you need to make exceptions, but also keep those standards really high. So if you can't make a game, or you can't turn up to a game an hour before, you can only do it half an hour. I understand that, but if you're 29 minutes before kick-off, don't expect to start, would be my approach. And you've got to set those guidelines and those parameters. You have to challenge yourself and the players and the club and the authorities to do things differently. You need to find your voice, but not lose your head. And I think in football, everything is so passionate. You can talk, and it's all angry. But no, find your voice, talk about positive things, not negative things. And the guy in the picture is Carl Jung. We all know about Freud and the father of psychology. But he says this: nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on the environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of a parent. And that's very relevant for vets football, because these are guys that have got the passion of a 5-year-old, the bodies, in some cases, of a 75-year-old, and they're frustrated that they can't do what they've always wanted to do. Yeah. The big thing for these guys this year is they've almost found their love, their childhood enthusiasm, and that's coming through lots in how they're engaging, not just with each other, but also with home. And if we can be a standard bearer for children coming over to watch us and saying, you play good football, you don't swear a lot, you eat your vegetables after the game, you're looking after yourself, that would be great. That's what I'm trying to achieve. Not to be something perfect, but for something to make a difference.
Brilliant.
And my last point is, you asked me about what next. What are the next steps? I'll talk about Gary Mabbitt at the end. Address the impacts of the lockdown. I've mentioned it before. It's impacting everybody, whether that's work, life, psychologically, physically, emotionally, money-wise. Before the lockdown, we were going to run a series of health checks. There's a charity in Essex called CHAPS. We look at a whole host of things, from blood pressure to cholesterol and prostate. We're of an age now. I've got a friend that's just had bowel cancer. You know, these things start to happen. Bits of us start to drop off or not work properly. Being a football club, whether it's for men, for women, for children, should actually be so much more than just football health. I'm going to look to use psychometrics and talk about how get individuals to understand themselves. That quiet lad in the corner that doesn't say too much. Is he suffering from something at home, or is he just heavily introverted? And actually, how does that impact upon him, and how do we communicate as a team, as a manager? And you can use loads of psychometric tools. There's a great one called the Luminous Spark that I strongly recommend. Think about pre-match nutrition and midweek diets. You know, don't just have something nice on a Saturday night. Look after yourself during the week. We're going to be looking at that. Improve the facilities, as you can see that we're halfway through. And inspire others to watch, join in, and take their own action. And that's why I refer to Gary Mabbitt. Go full circle. Gary, obviously a good footballer, ambassador for the FA, for FIFA, for various charities. He also has type 1 diabetes, as does my Charlie, who's had it for 12 years. And I've got a couple of players in the team that have actually got type 2 diabetes. But Gary's a standard bearer as far as I'm concerned. He took time out of his diary, very busy schedule, to spend time with my boy to tell him the impact that football can have on health and how health can impact football. And he spoke about his journey, his physical health, his mental health, and also his diabetic health. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate, amongst other things. And there are other type 1 diabetic footballers out there, and it isn't just about diabetes. But Gary is someone that I look at and go, we should all be more like him. And I suppose the last thing we want to do next season is play in our cup final. The FA, the league has suggested that it will be played at the start of the season, or Spain permitting. For the guys that haven't played in the cup final, they'd love to do that. Hopefully, we'll make a good show of ourselves.
Brilliant.
So that's us. That's me. That's what we're about.
No, honestly, fantastic. Actually, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I kind of had earlier questions, you've kind of covered as you've gone through. I don't know if Lawrence, is there anything you wanted to kind of pick up on before we end?
Well, no, I just thought it was quite interesting what you were saying about you know, learning and what you've learned, because I think it's a successful coach for me is someone that is able to kind of learn as much as they will lead. So whilst leading a team, they're open to learning, because ultimately, you know, that enables coaches to provide players with the tools that they need to bring out the best in their players. Yeah. So by, you know, just by being open to that, I suppose, and as you've said a few times, you know, you don't have all the answers, and we're not expected to have all the answers. And I think that's quite a good takeaway for any coaches watching, in that, you know, the X's and the O's and the technical knowledge of football, you know, it's necessary, but if you don't really know your players, if you don't really understand your players, then it is just a group of assembled players, you know, that are just put out there expected to play and perform in a certain way. And I think that's, you know, recognising, you know, those variables, recognising, you know, those individuals, recognising that everybody's different, and understanding your players and getting to know them on a more social level. You know, I think that just all helps, and as well as the kind of implementation that you've done of a kind of methodology. You know, that's all crucial to success. And as you've also said there, you know, success doesn't necessarily mean the team winning every week, you know, success can just be, you know, just having that kind of well-rounded, you know, holistic approach, that well kind of, you know, community feel that you've got with the club. People, you know, losing weight, people having positive mental health, you know, people even just, you know, getting a little bit more flexible. It's all, it all adds to it, and that is success rather than a team that wins the league.
Yeah, I mean, we've been speaking, I haven't got my watch on, maybe for an hour or so. I haven't once mentioned the formations that we play, or tactics that I employ. Everything leads up to that.
Mm.
And whether we play a 1-2-4-2, one formation, or something else is almost an irrelevance unless you have the building blocks in place. Going out that pitch, it won't make one bit of difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you'll win some games, yes, you'll lose some games, but you won't build a club, you won't build a team.
Yeah, it's that bigger picture, isn't it? It's looking beyond that big picture.
I think one thing that kind of summarises some of those bits there is you quote from yourself, Ashley, earlier about explore the options. I think that's probably true of all elements of your role as a coach, or as a facilitator of what you're doing, or of what anybody does in that volunteer coach role, is explore the options. That could be, you know, training activities. Go and look at what else is out there. Go and watch other people. Go and suck up all the information that you can, and then you make the best choices that you can based on the information that you've got in front of you. But the bit around and explore the options again in terms of the people. What do you know about them? What could you know about them? What are they happy to share? Is it you speak to them direct? Is it you speak to the parents, or, you know, teachers, or whoever you have that kind of contact with? But yeah, explore the options, and that will kind of open up your mind to other ways of doing things, and success will come in whatever way you deem success, I suppose. But thank you so much for today. Really appreciate it, Ashley. Would be great to perhaps do a follow-up in perhaps a few months, and we'll just pick up some of these points again and see how you get on. Hopefully get your cup final played.
Yeah, I think we'll have to start following the team. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on them.
Fully expecting full suits on that day, by the way.
It was referenced that we were all to be suited and boosted, and perhaps pop down to Northwood Market to buy some fake wash bags of Louis Vuitton or something. And
Perhaps you could go for the off-white Liverpool Cup final suit.
The Spice Boys.
Yes, I highly recommend that. I think I've got one in my wardrobe at home. So.
Excellent stuff. No, thanks again. Really appreciate it, and we'll hope to speak to you again soon. Keep up the fantastic work, and wish you success to everybody, and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Right.